live. Take a few minutes. Cool. There we go. So we should be live on Facebook. So as I said, for anyone who missed at the start, to the bottom left of your screen, as you look at it, you've got a mute button and a stop or share video. Ideally, I think everyone's muted at the moment, which is great, just to stop a bit of background noise. If there is any, then we can mute as well. So don't be offended if you're suddenly muted. It's just to stop any background noise. I mentioned the chat as well. So as we go through the presentation, please do pop any questions you've got in there. We'll have plenty of time for questions to make sure that everyone's got space for that. And obviously you don't have to just type them. You can kind of unmute yourself and chip in as well with that. But yeah, please do feel free to make use of the chat. I think that's everything for Zoom functions. Hopefully everyone can hear everything all right. And like I said, we'll be sharing some presentations as well. So we're joined by Melissa from Ancient House Museum, which is really exciting. So she'll be talking to us about the Maharaja Duleep Singh and his family and the kind of global connections that Thetford enjoys from the past. And then following that, I'll give a very short kind of update on our local group that I mentioned before and how that kind of links to Thetford's global connections now, as it were. So the group is called Aid Matters in Thetford, and it's basically been set up to start a conversation in and around Thetford on why supporting people overseas is really important, and to share some of the positives that it does. So primarily through UK aid, which is the money that our government sends overseas, and just the whole idea of international development and things like that to show the positives and to get people talking about it, and share the kind of the good things that people are doing, perhaps without even realizing or thinking about it, throughout the world. So that's a very quick introduction, and like I said, I'll give more of a background to that after Melissa's presentation. So I think, Melissa, if you're okay to get started, I know you've got a presentation to share, so feel free. Let me just make you co-host so you can do that. You should be ready to go.
Super. Okay, let's try sharing. Okay, hopefully people are seeing something saying the Duleep Singh family. Can you give me a thumbs up or a yes if you can? Brilliant, thank you. I can see Janet giving me a thumbs up. That's marvelous. So hello everybody, my name's Melissa and I'm the Learning Officer from the Ancient House Museum in Thetford. I'm really excited to be here in this Indian style summery weather to talk to you about our links at the museum and in Thetford to Maharaja Duleep Singh, who was the last Sikh Maharaja of Punjab, which is a part of India which is now split between India and Pakistan. So we are tomorrow going to be sort of commemorating the Partition Day, so Pakistani Independence Day, and when that line was drawn, splitting what was the Maharaja's kingdom in two. So those of you who know Thetford hopefully have heard of the Ancient House Museum, which is where I work in normal times and I'm keen to get back to once we fully eradicate this horrible disease. And this museum only exists because of the Maharaja's son, Prince Frederick, who I'll talk about a little bit more later. Hopefully some people will have seen this statue of Maharaja Duleep Singh, which is in Thetford on Button Island, so in the river there, and this was erected in 1999 for his centenary. So we're going to be talking today a little bit about why on earth a little town in Norfolk has got this rather grand equestrian statue of a turbaned chap in it. So we're going to take a dive back in time and start with Duleep Singh's dad. Here he is, a little miniature, Indian miniature of him. So his father was Ranjit Singh, who was known as the Lion of the Punjab. And he was a really successful Maharaja. He managed to unite all of the Sikh tribes in Punjab together under his rule. And his court was really notable for bringing in many Europeans and people from other nationalities to kind of find out what they knew about, make sure that he was incorporating all their best ideas, staying on top of technology, those kind of things. And it's notable that he sort of had a kind of golden age, his reign in Punjab, for things like religious tolerance. So he was quite happy for people he was ruling not to be a Sikh as he was, but to have other faiths, and indeed married some women of different faiths. He had 6 wives, and his last wife, his 6th wife, was this lady, Maharini Jinder Kaur. He married her in 1835. When she was, we think, in her early 20s, and he was 54. So a little bit of an age gap going on there. And she was notable as being a great beauty. They had 1 child together, Duleep Singh, the star of our story. And he was born on the 4th of September 1838 at Lahore Palace. 10 months after his birth, his father Ranjit Singh died. And because he'd been such a powerful ruler, his death caused a sort of disintegration of his kingdom. There was a massive dispute over the succession. There were many possible people to succeed him as Maharaja. So pretty soon, Duleep Singh's brother by one of the other wives, Shia Singh, became the Maharaja. He was assassinated just sort of 9 months later. Then there were other claims to the throne. More people were killed. A woman who was pregnant with another possible heir was seduced into a bathhouse and stabbed. It was really horrible. Loads of bloodshed. Lots and lots of people were killed. In the end, the Sikh army decided to support Duleep Singh, kind of get behind his rule. He was only very young at this time. To support him as to become the new Maharaja. So he was given that title, but because he was still a child, his mother, Maharini Jinder, she became regent along with her brother, who became the prime minister. So they were kind of in charge. And that sort of settled things down for a little while. This is a little miniature of Duleep Singh, probably around 6 or 7 years old in this illustration. And this time he was living as Maharaja in great luxury in Lahore Palace. He had highly skilled tutors who were teaching him Gurmukhi, which is the written way that you write Punjab, the language of the Punjab. He was learning calligraphy, hunting, shooting, all these sorts of things. He loved sports. He was really into falconry and archery. He had a huge procession of people who looked after him. It was said that any time he left the palace, 100 people had to come with him. And he had loads of exotic pets, peacocks, and so on. So he was having a pretty good time. However, trouble was brewing. People were not happy, and the Sikh army accused his uncle, who was prime minister, of being a traitor. And eventually that led to him being assassinated, actually in front of Duleep Singh and his mother. If anyone's seen the film The Black Prince, they depict this very graphically with the blood of his uncle kind of falling across his face. We don't know exactly what happened, but it was definitely something that he remembered and wrote about later in life, a very horrific thing for a small child to see. That happened on the 21st of September 1835. And this kind of kicked off what became the first Anglo-Sikh Wars. So this is a really complicated time period. I'm going to go through this fairly fast, so we keep with the Maharaja. Essentially, Maharani Jinder sent part of the Sikh army against the other half that had caused the assassination of her brother. And this kind of scared the British, who were at this stage trying to take over India in order to get hold of many of their riches, the spices and so on. And this kind of provoked war. So it looked like it was going to be a fairly easy victory for Maharani Jinder's troops, because there were 60,000 Sikh soldiers going against just 8,000 in the Sikh army. But there were some people in the Sikh army who didn't support Maharani Jinder, and so they kind of leaked the battle plans to the British, and some people cut off supplies. So eventually the British were successful in that war and won. And a number of the men who were fighting in that first Anglo-Sikh War also came from Thetford. So the Holy Boys, the Norfolk Regiment, were there in that those conflicts. So the British Army took charge of Duleep Singh and forced him to surrender the kingdom and the Kohinoor diamond, which is this great gem that was part of Ranjit Singh's accoutrement. He wore it in an armband to show his royalty, to the East India Company, who were working for the British, who you can see here in their uniform. And because of the fear by the British of the power that Maharani Jinder had in terms of commanding support from the Sikh empire, they split up her from her son, and she was exiled by Sir Henry Lawrence, who we can see here in this picture. So basically, by keeping them apart, they were holding Duleep Singh sort of hostage to her good behavior. You know, if you stir up trouble, we've got your little boy. At this stage, this chap, Sheer Singh, he gathered together a load of Sikhs who were narked with the British and kicked off the second Anglo-Sikh War. Again, there's lots of confusion within the Sikh army. Not everybody's pulling in the same direction, and the British are sending in more and more troops because they need to secure India. They want to have it for all the wealth of the spices, of the salt mines, and they want the diamonds. So they're prepared to put a lot of force into it. They want to expand into India. And eventually they took possession of Lahore. And at this point, they decided that it was the safest to remove Duleep Singh from the centre of the Sikh kingdom, from the centre of Lahore, and send him off into exile. Again, in that that second Sikh War, we had members of the Royal Norfolk Regiment there, some from Thetford, and actually many from Wotton. I know we've got someone here from Wotton. And this sword was one of the sort of spoils of war brought back by one of those men, and is now in the Regimental Museum collection at Norfolk Museum Service, and we have it on display at Ancient House, which you can come and see when we're able to reopen. So the deal with this split was a sort of, I suppose you might call it a bit of a kind of legal trick. The Maharaja and his mother in this very difficult situation, they can't be sure of support from their own armies. They've kind of got to make some sort of deal with the British. And the idea is that Duleep Singh gives up his kingdom until he's 18, until he's old enough and strong enough to, you know, look after it, become a man. And the British will take care of it in his stead. In return, they'll give him a pension and look after him. And then when he comes of age, you know, everything's kind of up for debate again. So he gets taken into the care of this man, Dr. Logan, and his wife. And that happened, they took him off to be far away from his mother and into his own complex. He did come with some of his relatives, some of his cousins came with him, so he did know people who he was going with, but he was separated from his mother. And this is when we get one of the first kind of real controversies of this story. It's very difficult to know whether Dr. Logan denied the right of any of the Sikh tutors to come with the Maharaja, or whether none of them wished to come with him. But it certainly happened that he left Lahore without anybody who was in his retinue to teach him about Sikhism. Dr. Logan always denied that he had made this happen, that he writes in many documents as the years go on that he had given every opportunity for such tutors to come, but none wished to. But whatever happened, it meant that we got this young boy taken away from his mother, taken away from much of his family, and living in the care of Dr. and Mrs. Logan, who were both very devout Christians. So he stayed in India for some time under the care of the Logans, but in as time went on, he started to express desires to come and be educated in England. So even though he was receiving a sort of English-style education under the Logans' care, he wanted to go to England and experience the things that he was hearing about firsthand. And he also became very interested in studying Christianity. We've got a letter from Duleep Singh when he was 12 that he wrote to Dr. Logan saying, "You'll be surprised to learn of my determination to embrace the Christian religion." Again, Dr. Logan spends a long time kind of reporting that this is coming from Duleep Singh. It's not being pushed on him, but he's pleased that it's happening. And certainly Duleep Singh's fondness for Christianity caused a bit of a rift with some of his other relatives, and they sort of left. In 1851, the Governor General, Lord Dalhousie, came to visit the Maharaja and Dr. Logan and presented him with this rather fine Bible, which we have in the collection at the Ancient House, which has this inscription to the Maharaja on the front page, and also commissioned a portrait of him by Beechey to be taken. And at this stage, the Maharaja continued to say that he wanted to become a Christian. And on the 8th of March, 1853, he was baptized into Christianity using waters from the Ganges. And after that happened, everybody felt that it was safe for him to be allowed to visit England. So how much this was kind of held over his head, if you want to go abroad, if you want to see England that you've heard so much about, you've got to, make this conversion, and how much it was really coming from him, we simply don't know. So he set off for England with the Logans on the 18th of April, 1854. And when he arrived, he was... Oh, sorry. Oh, I missed that. So he arrived in England. He was 15. This is a rather glamorous photo of him. I always think we sometimes call this the pop star photo of the Maharaja, and it was taken around the time when he arrived. And on the 1st of July, 1854, he met Queen Victoria for the first time. She's really pleased to see him. She loved this kind of dashing Indian prince in his traditional regal attire with lots of jewels. She had her favourite artist immediately called Winterhalter to paint him this really famous picture of him. She recorded in her diary that we had the good Maharaja with us today, and he has perfect teeth. There's lovely illustrations that she makes of him, and he brings with him turbans to teach her children how to tie turbans, and plays with them, and they become great friends. There's this fantastic story about the Kohinoor diamond, which by this stage was forming part of the the jewels that Victoria wore, she wore it as a necklace, and it had been exhibited at the Great Exhibition in 1851 by Prince Albert, you know, at Crystal Palace, as this great, amazing diamond, this mountain of light, the Koh-i-Noor. And everybody was really disappointed when they came to see it because it was uncut. And they thought, oh, this isn't much of a diamond. This is what we expect the diamond to look like. And so Albert had it recut. The off pieces of it, the off cuts were turned into a necklace that Queen Victoria wore, and the finished product sparkles, and it's still in the crown of jewels, the crown jewels today. It's in the Queen Mother's crown. If anybody is a fan of Doctor Who, there's another theory for why he had it cut, which was to combat werewolves, but we're pretty sure that's not the real reason. It's much more to impress people. So there's a story that the Duleep Singh was with Queen Victoria, sitting for his portrait, and Queen Victoria came into the drawing room where they were having this sitting, accompanied by 2 beefeaters straight from the Tower of London, who had brought with them the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, recut in its small case. And the Maharaja took up the diamond in his hand, took it to a nearby window and held it up and closely inspected it for many moments. Lady Logan, who was there, recalled in her memoirs that she felt a tension in the room like nothing she'd ever felt before. She couldn't tell whether the Maharaja would fall into a fit of rage, flinging the diamond out of the window. But after some time had passed, he returned the diamond to the Queen and said, "It is to me, ma'am, the greatest pleasure to thus have the opportunity as a loyal subject of myself rendering to my sovereign the Koh-i-Noor." So formally returning it to her. Lord Dalhousie, when he heard about this, was absolutely outraged. He said that the diamond was never a gift for the Maharaja to render to the Queen at all, and that if he, Lord Dalhousie, had been within 1,000 miles, the Maharaja would never have attempted such humbug. The question of who the Koh-i-Noor belongs to remains a contentious issue today. Duleep Singh kind of threw himself into all of court life. He went to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight with the Queen and his family. He played blind man's buff with the royal children and taught them how to play football and foot races. He got very involved in the farm that was there and was fantastically interested in the machinery. He also attended many great royal functions. This is an illustration from the Illustrated London News of the wedding of the Prince of Wales, and there in the crowd, wearing his turban, singled out from almost every other white person in this scene, we can see the Maharaja right up there in the middle of all the dignitaries. Queen Victoria sort of began to develop quite a maternal interest in the Maharaja, and we have accounts of her praying for him and hoping to be able to have the right protection and guidance for him, and he promised that he would also pray for her whenever he could. As time went on, he expressed a wish to return to India and also to meet his mother, Maharini Jinder, who was still in exile. He was very keen to learn, as he became a man, more about the customs of his homeland. And he had a particular interest in having a go at shooting a tiger. That was a real motivation for him. So after a couple of years consultation, the British government decided that Maharini Jinder, who was now quite ill and partially blind, was no longer the threat that she had been previously, and agreed to let him visit her. So in February 1861, the Maharaja travelled to Calcutta and was greeted with a 21-gun salute when he got to Spencer's Hotel and saw the Viceroy. Duleep Singh discovered that it was really difficult for him to understand his native tongue because he'd become so accustomed to speaking English for so many years. He was aware that the British government wouldn't trust him to return to Punjab itself. and the viceroy stated that it was because it wasn't that they didn't trust him. They knew he was a loyal subject of the Queen, but it was the other Sikhs. It was the Sikh army that they couldn't trust. That his presence would stir up aggression among the Sikhs, and that certainly seemed to be the case. A number of Sikhs. Sikh soldiers lined up outside the viceroy's house waiting to see their Maharaja, causing great nervousness for the British inside. Duleep Singh was eventually reunited with his mother, and we don't know exactly what passed in that first meeting, but we can only imagine the emotional feelings that they must have had, having been parted for so many years. And it was very clear that she had great control over the Maharaja and was able to inspire him to think more about his past. Despite this, he found it that he wasn't enjoying being in India. He couldn't go shooting, the weather was too hot. He was sick of people kind of following him around, trying to ask him things and waiting for him to make speeches that he didn't feel ready to make. So he decided that he'd go back to England, but that he would take his mother with him. And the British authorities were absolutely thrilled with this, because they'd been trying to get Maharani Jinder out of India for a really long time, because they were worried about her power to inspire the Sikh troops to rebellion. They were so excited, in fact, that as soon as she landed in England, they returned all of her jewellery to her that they'd taken away years before, and also gave her a pension of £3,000 a year. So she came back to England. On his way back, he messaged ahead and asked for Dr. Logan to arrange a house for them to stay in. So they ended up living in London in Lancaster Gate. The stay was only short, but during their time together, the Maharani Jinder had an opportunity to explain to the Maharaja all that he might have been as King of Punjab. And Duleep Singh started to write letters, first to Dr. Logan, inquiring about his own private property in India, and particularly the ownership of the Kohinoor, because neither of those things had been included in that initial agreement when he was 5 with the British. On the 1st of August 1863, Maharani Jinder died. Her funeral was attended by many nobles, and her remains were kept at Kensal Green, which it was a non-conformist resting place, and we have the grave marker while her body rested there at the museum, which was rediscovered about 10 years ago. This was because by Sikh rites you need to be cremated, and cremation was illegal in England at the time. So she was waiting, her body was waiting there for the Maharaja to seek permission to take her to India to be cremated. Just 2 months later, Dr. Logan died as well, and the Maharaja was very upset by this. Within 2 months, he'd lost both a mother and the man he considered to be his father, having no real memory of Ranjit Singh. And he paid for a very grand granite and marble monument to be erected to Dr. Logan in a churchyard in Felixstowe, which is still there. And he said that Dr. Logan was one of the few Englishmen he'd ever been able to trust. As a result of these 2 losses, he decided that now was the time when he needed a wife. He wanted a Christian wife, but from the East, someone who would be unspoilt by the luxuries of being an English aristocrat. So he headed off to India with his mother's body, and en route he stopped off in Cairo, and there he went to the American Presbyterian Mission School, where he met Bamba Mullah. So she was a pupil at the school. She was 16. She could only speak Arabic, and she was there because she was the illegitimate son of this man, who was from Germany, and an Abyssinian woman who he kept as a mistress, and who also worked at the school so she could stay in contact with her daughter. Duleep Singh was overwhelmed by her beauty and proposed via an interpreter because she could only speak Arabic. And then he sort of left her there to quickly be trained up to speak English and know how to cope in India, while he headed off on to Bombay with his mother to have her cremated and scattered her ashes in the river there. And then he came back, picked her up, headed back to England, got married first. So on the 9th of June, 1864, they got married in a small ceremony in Alexandria. He said his vows in English, she said hers in Arabic, and they spent a month or so in Egypt before they returned to England. And the newspaper accounts of the day talk about her striking beauty. And there's various letters from society women saying, "Oh, you'll never guess, I saw the new Maharini. Oh, she's terribly striking. She's got this beaded hat on. She's absolutely marvelous. She's the talk of the town." And he brought her back to Elvedon Hall, which he purchased with some of his pension, which is near Thetford. And he'd managed to get Bamba pregnant by this stage. So poor woman, she came back pregnant to a house covered in building works because he wanted to turn this very English country home with excellent shooting into a sort of Indian palace. Unfortunately, the first child was stillborn, and to recuperate he took Bamba on a trip down the Nile. But we do get an idea of the house that they finally returned to when the building work had been completed by these images where you can see the Indian inspiration. He's supposed to have shown the architect illustrations of the palaces of Lahore and asked him to copy them. We've got these Indian inspired tiles. And he also brought with him this man who became his valet and later in the story his spy. He was very keen on, oh, here we go, here's Bamba with the children she's going to have later in front of Elvedon Hall. And one of the reasons why Duleep Singh was attracted to Elvedon Hall, which is a 17,000-acre estate, was the excellent shooting. So here he is with a shooting party, including the Prince of Wales. The Maharaj was supposed to be the second best shot in England, and they had, a lot of success shooting things. There's one account of a party on the 12th of November, 1872, when the Maharaj and his party shot 604 pheasants, 132 partridges, 300 hares, and 71 rabbits. So pretty good going. However, with this growing family and gambling debts and a number of mistresses that the Maharaja was keeping in various flats around London, he started to get into kind of financial difficulties and sought an audience with the Queen. He wanted to have his income increased so that he could support his children better. But the India office said that he was spending too much money on gambling and taking too many holidays in Paris, and they wouldn't do it. So he also threatened to take up politics, thinking of becoming a member of Parliament. But lots of officials in the India office were dissatisfied with that and fought against it. And the Queen thought it would create a kind of constitutional problem. So that was sort of shut down. So he continued to drown in debt. He was getting more and more into debt. And he carried on appealing to the India office, saying, you need to give me more money just from my private property in India. I should be getting, £100,000 per annum. They rejected the appeal, continued to reject the appeal, and finally the India office said they would give him £56,000 on condition Elvedon Hall was sold after his death. But he didn't want to do that because then he'd leave his children with no home, and he was trying to started to reduce his expenses. But he really felt that he was being cheated by the government. He was fed up with the British Empire, really dissatisfied with the way that they had treated him. And he started to think about ways that he might regain the kingdom of his birth. He moved to live in Holland Park in London and started going to the British Library regularly to produce a document to argue for to have his rights returned. So this is an example of one of the letters that he wrote where he's asking for the return of the Koh-i-Noor diamond. He got shut down repeatedly and nobody was listening to him, and so he started to look for other allies, and this cartoon is a sort of poking fun at him, looking for allies in other enemies of the British Empire, including the Irish and the Russians. And at this time he also had audience with a number of Sikh men and started to learn and re-embrace his Sikh faith, and wished to basically become what his mother had said that he should be, this great king of Punjab. And so he travelled, gathered his family up, and set off to return home to India and reclaim his throne. And he was assured by all the Sikhs that he met that Sikhs across India would be elated to hear of him coming. They'd come immediately to support him, and kick the British out. And he had promises of support from Ireland and from Russia in his endeavour. So he set out with his family, and he got as far as Aden, where the British had sent word to stop him. And he was arrested there by Brigadier General Hogg, who escorted him off the ship, saying that he was being disloyal and that this wasn't going to happen, and effectively imprisoned him in Aden. So the Maharaja sent his wife Bamba and his children back to England, where he continued to kind of fight against this, make plans, try to get out. He went to Paris to wait there to think about how he was going to move forward, carried on having meetings with Russian journalists who promised that he would have an audience with Tsar Alexander III, who would support him. He travelled to Russia to try and make that happen. Unfortunately, there were spies involved who informed against him. Many of his contacts died, and he was never able to get that audience with the Tsar. Meanwhile, back in England, his children were living in Folkestone. Maharini Bamba was unwell, increasingly, we think, suffering from alcoholism. His youngest son died at the age of 13. His youngest daughter was ill. She did recover, but her mother, who had nursed her, also died. These are their graves at Elvedon Church. Duleep Singh came back to see them, but was not able to attend their funeral. And he also called for his mistress, Ada, to join him in Paris. And they had an illegitimate child together, and then got married after Maharini Bamba had died. So he had a lot of kids to be contending with, while also trying to foment this rebellion. He stayed in Paris trying to make this happen, selling lots of his jewels. They had another child with Ada, and carried on. He had a stroke. He got partially paralysed. He nipped back to England to try and make his peace with Queen Victoria. He asked for royal pardon, but that wasn't sort of forthcoming in any real sense. And finally, on the 21st of October 1893, he had an epileptic fit in his hotel in Paris, and died there. And his sons, Prince Frederick and Prince Victor, even though he stated in his will that he wanted to be buried where he died, decided to bring him home to Elvedon and have him buried alongside his first wife and son, which you can see here, these three graves. His funeral was really well attended, and Queen Victoria and the Prince of Wales sent wreaths. So that's the kind of potted history of Maharaj Duleep Singh, a whirlwind story, which I still think needs to be made into a kind of spy movie. So there's a lot in there going on. But I'm going to just quickly talk to you about his children, who also had amazing lives and a huge impact on us here in Thetford. So the great thing about the Duleep Singh children is they loved having their photographs taken. So we've got some great images of them. So this one shows the three princesses. So we've got Princess Bamba, Princess Catherine and Princess Sophia, and then poor little Albert Edward, who died at 13. So the only things we really know about him is he did terribly well at school, and his schoolmasters thought he was marvelous. But I always think he's quite a sad character because we lose him so young. But the three princesses were all very fierce ladies in their own rights. But we'll start with Prince Victor, who was the first surviving son of Duleep Singh and Maharini Bamba. And he also became the first person of Sikh heritage to visit Canada. So he's very well known in Canada. And he's supposedly, possibly, the real father of the current owner of the house that is now used to film Downton Abbey. There's a lot of controversy about this story, but he's an interesting chap, and not a huge amount is known about him, but he certainly shared his father's love of gambling and often got into debt. He did get married. He got married to a lady who's supposed to have been told by Queen Victoria that one of her jobs was to take him out of England, so that there wasn't a threat of him getting a whole load of people together and trying to follow in his father's footsteps and retake Punjab. This is Princess Bamba. She's the oldest of the princesses, and she outlives everybody. She wanted to become a doctor and spent a lot of time going on various medical courses, and was almost at the point of graduating and getting to be the doctor she wanted to be. And only to find that they suddenly decided, oh, actually, by the way, we're not going to give that qualification to any women on the course. So quite frustrating for her. She ended up going back to live in India, and she was there for partition, and she's buried there. This is Princess Catherine. She was a forceful lady. She was a suffragist, so she fought for rights for women, but without kind of smashing windows and jumping in front of horses. She was very much more for peaceful protests and fundraising. She had a village of Christmas trees to raise money for the suffragists. She fell in love with her governess, Lena Schaffer, and the two of them went to live in Germany, where Lena was from, and stayed there for 20 years together. Lena said that they were like two little mice in a house living together. And they were there in the 1930s with the rise of Nazism. And the accounts of the time say that the neighbours really disapproved of this little old Indian lady and how dare she be there, particularly because she was great friends with a number of Jewish musicians. So in 1938, after Lena had died, Princess Catherine sold up everything in Germany and left, but not before saving a number of Jewish families from the Holocaust. In one case, going sort of nose to nose with the architect of the Holocaust and saying, I'm signing to take this chap out of prison. I'm taking him home with me, and him sort of acquiescing to her royal bearing and letting them go. And she brought them home to England, and some of them stayed with her and her sister. So we affectionately like to think of her as kind of the Sikh Schindler who saved these people. We've got Princess Sophia. She's probably the best known at the moment because she featured on stamps 2 years ago. She was a suffragette. She fought for women's rights. She's there in the photographs of big protests like Black Friday, where she recorded the assaults by the police on the women who were protesting. and she also took in evacuees during the Second World War. And then possibly, I'm biased here, but of course I love Prince Frederick, Prince Freddie, the second son of the Maharaja, because he is the reason I get to work in such a beautiful building in Thetford, the ancient house. He fought in the First World War. He trained horses behind enemy lines, and then after the war he used some of his pension from the British government to purchase the Ancient House Museum and have it opened as a museum in 1924. And this is a photograph of the opening. You can see him there in his rather grand fur coat. He really loved local history and heritage and wanted to preserve it, and a number of the objects that we have on display in the museum come from Prince Frederick. So a lot of what we're able to tell people about the story of Norfolk comes from the fact an Indian prince purchased it, and he was a great photographer. So we have these wonderful photographs here of his mother and his siblings, and his chair. We've got letters of a little boy who was very affronted to find somebody else sitting in the prince's chair. So that's a quick whip through the Duleep Singh family, and I'd love to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was really, really interesting. I hadn't known much about the Maharaja at all, so it was incredible to hear about his very, very interesting life story and his children as well. So thank you very much for that. That's great. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to either pop them in the chat box or just unmute your microphone and chip in if you had any or any comments or anything. I know I definitely like to visit the museum when it opens again. I haven't been to the museum in Thetford, but I'd love to go and kind of see all of the displays there. That would be amazing. Yeah, we'll give it a second, but feel free to jump in if you've got any.
I've been to the museum in the past and found it most interesting. I wonder when it's going to be opening.
Yeah, do we know, Melissa? Have you got any kind of word of when it might open again?
We're in the process of doing risk assessments to make sure that we can open safely. We don't have a date yet, but as soon as we do, we'll definitely let everybody know. We just have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's and make sure everything's safe.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll keep my eyes on it. Thank you.
The photograph you've got of the shooting party in front of Elvedon Hall, and there's also a letter to Lord Walsingham. In that photograph, that Lord Walsingham is seated in the front of the photograph. Ah,
yes. All the great and the good showing up to slaughter animals with the Maharaja. Yes.
And he used to shoot at Merton with Lord Walsingham. He was also an extremely noted shot. I think he shot 1,000 birds in one day on one occasion.
I can imagine some friendly rivalry going on between the two of them.
I think there was.
Amazing. So we've got a question from Facebook, from the Facebook stream. So how well known is the Maharaja's story in Thetford, do you think? How many people in Thetford are kind of aware of it? And what does the museum do in particular to raise awareness of his story, other than perhaps the displays and things like that you have?
Oh, fantastic questions. Thank you. I hope the story of the Maharaja is fairly well known in Thetford. There's the statue, obviously, and we also have a Maharaja trail which takes you around the town. Of course, we can always do more to spread the story. So one of the things that we've been working on, along with many partners in the town and across the county over the past 2 years, is festivals looking at links between Norfolk culture and Punjab culture. So we had Festival of Thetford and Punjab, and then Festival of Norfolk and Punjab. So we had a number number of activities there looking at those links. One of the most sort of interesting to me, because it was so new, was thinking about the links between Morris dancing, which we know is very popular in Norfolk with Kent's men, Will Kemp, and also Bhangra dancing, and both those dancing forms come from an agricultural starting point. So we had groups of Morris dancers and groups of Bhangra dancers kind of working together to create this kind of fusion dance, mixing those two cultures. I thought that was really fascinating, just kind of one of the outcomes. But of course, all of our activities were focused around sharing the Maharaja story. So I think lots of people in Thetford will probably, hopefully, know about it. And we do have lots of school groups that come into the museum when we're open to learn about the Maharaja, from very, very young children who come with it as part of a significant local person, through to people who are studying things like empire, and he's, of course, really important for that. In terms of other things that we do to raise awareness of his story, we're participating in lots of events at the moment, of which this is one, which are coinciding with the very first South Asian Heritage Month, which is going on until the 17th of August. And on Saturday, we're doing our very first ever Twitch event, where we're using, there's a video game called Assassin's Creed, The Last Maharaja, which is based around the story of Maharaja Duleep Singh. So we're going to be doing a live stream of that on Twitch, and in the chat talking about, what the video game has got historically right and what perhaps is a little bit more artistic license. So we're hoping that that's going to bring the story of the Maharaja to sort of gamers who perhaps won't be so familiar with it. And we're also working on our long-term project is to turn one of the rooms in the museum into a gallery dedicated to telling the story of Duleep Singh and his family.
That's incredible. Lots of stuff. I love the idea of the the Twitch event and the gaming, because I've never heard of anyone doing something like that before. That's really, really cool, really exciting. It's brilliant. We've also got another question from Facebook, which is, what do you feel is the influence of the Maharaja to the local area? Do you think, for example, that food has maybe changed, or are there any kind of maybe cultural influences around the town that you know?
What an interesting question. Yeah, so I think there's lots of ways the Maharaja's influenced the local area. I mean, we know from historical accounts that he was a big employer. Lots of people employed by the Elvedon estate. He was supposed to be a really good person to have as an employer. He gave everybody a great party at Christmas. So we've got those sort of folk memories of him. And I think particularly Prince Frederick, being such a great collector and being so generous in donating much of his collection to the museum and to the library and the record office. A huge amount of what we know about the local area we only know because the Maharaja came to shoot there effectively. So that's a really massive influence. I think it does mean that and this needs more research, but it's very notable that just a few years after the Maharaja's death, Thetford elected Britain's first black mayor, Dr. Mims, and it's notable that even his political opponents don't use racial slurs to attack him. They do kind of stick to kind of policy, and we wonder, and this is just surmise, whether that's a result of the fact of having, the Black Prince, as he was nicknamed by Queen Victoria, having such a prominent role in the county for such a long time, that perhaps that sort of helped people think that it was more achievable. In terms of food, we've got Indian restaurants in Thetford now, but I mean, don't think there's a place in Britain that hasn't had, that is a real effect of empire, isn't it, that we love Indian food and love curry. There is this great story about the Maharaja when he first arrived being served a curry by this lady of nobility who prided herself on having excellent curry, and saying in a sort of self-deprecating way, "Oh, I'm sure it's not as good as you're used to. If you don't like it, just say." And he said, "Oh, thank goodness, it tastes absolutely appalling." And she was kind of shamed. So I'm not sure how much food has been changed locally.
No, that's really, really interesting. No, that's great. Another question from Facebook is, was there a bit of a conflict potentially between the two princesses, with one being a suffragist and one being a suffragette?
Good question. Good question. I think in the way that we now understand the story of the suffrage movement, it looks like more of a fight between the suffragists and the suffragettes. And the suffragettes have had the best PR machine. They're the ones that everybody knows, even though they were in the minority. Most people were suffragists, only a very few people were suffragettes. And there wasn't as much conflict between the two viewpoints as we perhaps think. So we don't have any indication from the letters written between the princesses that there's conflict over their particular desires about how to act on this, because they are both sort of pulling for the same cause, which is empowerment of women. But what is interesting is that Princess Sophia, the suffragette, she does differ from some of the other more well-known suffragettes, like the Pankhursts. Christabel and Emmeline were very concerned about middle-class empowerment, make sure middle-class women can vote. And it was only really Sylvia Pankhurst who was interested in working-class women. And certainly both Catherine and Sophia seem to have been concerned with, rights for all women. So I think it's more likely that there was conflict within the suffragette camp between Sophia and some of the bigwigs, although she was right up there and sort of at the right hand of the Pankhursts.
Amazing, that's really interesting. Really interesting. Thank you for that. I think that's all the questions from Facebook. Did anyone else have any other questions at all or comments? I think, Melissa, there was some really interesting, great answers to those questions, so thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
If not, we will, if you have any questions that come to you at all, I will be sending a little follow-up email. So if something suddenly came to you and you wanted to ask another question, then you will absolutely be able to then as well. So if that's it from everyone, what I'll do, I've just got a few quick slides to whiz through. I won't keep you for much longer at all. And then we'll call it a day. But thank you so much, Melissa. That was really, really interesting. It's fascinating to learn more about the Maharaja and his family.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem, no problem. I'll definitely be planning a visit to the museum when it's open again, definitely. Brilliant. So I'll just quickly go through these. So obviously you've heard from Ancient House Museum, and hopefully especially those who are in Thetford, you've no doubt visited before and you'll be able to go when it's open again. So I just wanted to give a bit more of a background about our group, our local group in Thetford, Aid Matters in Thetford, and yeah, talk a bit more about the links to Ancient House Museum and other groups in Thetford and what we do. So like I said, the group is a local group set up to basically bring people together to talk about our global connections, helping people around the world, international development, all sorts in that field, and basically promote the good that it does and share the good news. It's part of a wider campaign, so there are a few other local groups dotted around the country, and they're supported by charities such as One, UNICEF, Oxfam, Save the Children and VSO. So yeah, it is all part of a wider campaign to get the positive stories about helping people all around the globe out there, and get people talking about it. We talk a lot about UK aid and development work. UK aid is the money that our government spend overseas to support people, lifting them out of extreme poverty, for example, to deal with global health crises, such as the one we're in at the moment with coronavirus, to deal with disasters and emergencies, again, much like Lebanon at the moment, and the disaster that Beirut has experienced recently, conflict, things like that. We spend just 0.7% of our gross national income on UK aid, so less than 1% is spent overseas. 99.3% is spent here in the UK. At the moment, it's channeled through our Department for International Development. Come September, some of you might have heard on the news, that department is to be merged with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to form a new department called the Department for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Doesn't quite slip off the tongue. So yeah, at the moment, our Department for International Development has got a really good reputation for transparency and effectiveness, which the Foreign and Commonwealth Office doesn't quite have. So yeah, we're yet to see how that will impact on aid spending, where it goes, how transparent it is. But yeah, so at the moment it's through the Department for International Development, but that will be changing. In terms of Norfolk's contribution, which is where kind of the global links to Thetford and the wider county come in, there's a brilliant website called Norfolk Counts that you can have a look at that has actually worked out the contribution that Norfolk as a county contributes to that total of national income being spent overseas through UK aid. And it's got some really nice statistics on actually what, as a county, our contributions have made. So for example, there's one at the bottom there. So over 13,500 people got access to clean water and toilets in 2017. So it's a bit more of a kind of figure you can look at and think, wow, actually my contributions, without even knowing it, through your taxes and things like that, have meant that you know, people's lives have been transformed in a really positive way, which we think is a good thing. So yeah, I definitely encourage people, if you're interested, to have a look at that Norfolk Counts website. I was going to open it up to questions here. I realise that's a bit of a quick run through, but I just wanted to give a bit of a background to our local group and what we're doing. I will also mention that there is a Town of Sanctuary group in Thetford, and a lot of our volunteers and people that we're connected with are linked to the Town of Sanctuary group as well. So obviously international development and supporting people overseas is such a huge topic that within that, things, you know, issues around refugees, asylum seekers, health, education, conflict, you know, it's a huge area, even environmental issues as well. So all of those kind of topics are kind of the things we look at, and the work being done in any of those areas, the good work being done, we kind of talk about and like to promote the good news that people don't often see. I'll skip up. If you have got any questions, do just write them in the chat box or chip in. I was just going to pop to this next slide, so that if you were interested in hearing anything more about the local group Aid Matters in Thetford, or indeed about Ancient House Museum, anything else you've heard in Melissa's presentation, please do get in touch. As I said, I'll be sending a follow-up email, so if you had any questions at all, just send them my way and we can go from there. We've got a Facebook page for Aid Matters. Obviously, Ancient House Museum are also on Facebook, so please do have a look at those. On the Aid Matters page, we share kind of local charity news. We share global news as well around UK aid and international development, just to show what's kind of going on locally and globally. Obviously, you can talk to your friends and family about things that you've heard in this presentation, especially if you're local to Thetford, the links with the Maharaja and things like that. Absolutely share that knowledge. And lastly, we're also holding a few street stalls in Thetford over August. So we're actually there today. We're there every Tuesday in August at the marketplace, where we're just kind of talking to people, engaging with the public about these kind of global issues, UK aid, helping people overseas, and our connections in that sense. So if you're about in Thetford and wanted to come along and speak to us, then please do pop down on Tuesday market days if you're interested. I'll just go back to this slide. So we've created a very short feedback poll, just so we can gather your kind of thoughts and feedback on the event today. So if you could take a moment to just open that up. I think I can't see the chat box, but hopefully thanks to Hira, the link has been popped in there. It's very quick. Feedback is always very welcome, so we can make sure that we keep improving on these events, because hopefully in the future we'll obviously do a lot more of them. So it'd be great if you could take a moment to respond to that. Hopefully you've got that. And that's pretty much it from me. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and just say thank you very much for coming along. Or do we have another question from Melissa? We might do. I've got one quick question, Melissa, and I guess we could open it up to anyone actually, Melissa and anyone else who might want to chip in. Why do you feel UK aid, international development, helping people around the world is important?
Oh,
oh,
big questions.
I
I like it. Challenging. Well, I think speaking for me rather than with the museum voice, because I haven't consulted with them about this issue. I think there's the human idea that if you see a fellow human suffering, surely we should do what we can to help and support those people. Your compassion shouldn't be limited by the borders of the country you happen to have been born into, and I don't think that is for most people. And then I suppose from a historical perspective, a lot of history is people from the country I happen to be born in nipping off to other parts of the world and nicking their stuff. And since we've benefited from that, it seems like a good idea to pay some of it back.
No,
but I'd love to hear what other people have think.
Feel free. I did find that really interesting in your presentation, the links to the British Army and our empire and things like that. It's we definitely have a long history of involvement in other countries, which is definitely an important thing to remember, I think, and talk about. Definitely. Did anyone else want to? You're more than welcome to come in if you wanted to, if you had any thoughts. But again, if you had any thoughts or questions, feel free to get in touch afterwards. I think that might be it. So what I will do, I'm going to stop sharing on Facebook.